Bill and Sue. It's so wonderful to have you with us. I just want you to know that Bill and I have just a few questions for you. After all the books that you both have written, I'm sure that we could be with you for hours, but we're going to make this about a half-hour conversation. Before we get started, I think we can all see, Bill, that you are in an immobilizer. Can you explain?
Yeah, my right arm is in a sling because there I was on my low carbon bicycle 1 minute, and the next minute I was flat on the pavement with a lot of broken ribs and a messed up shoulder. So all I can tell anybody is wear your helmet, wear your mask, wear your helmet.
Well, there's some good advice to start off. That's for sure.
We should know it, but
Absolutely. Well, Bill, why don't you get us started on the questions?
We're two big fans sitting here. We look forward to our discussion, Bill and Sue. Journalism and the environment and democracy are under fire these days, we're sorry to say. So why don't we open with something of an opening statement from both of you, go as long as you want or short. Bill, we're looking to you for perhaps a status report on where we stand right now with global warming. And Sue, looking to you for perhaps where do you stand on the fairness in voting that is coming up? Any fears that of what might happen?
Sue's topic may be more time critical, so I'll defer to her first.
Well, I think we all know that we have a problem, that democracy is under attack, both domestically and from foreign agents who are very eager to see this American experiment fail. And we've seen that there are numerous voter suppression activities going on, efforts by the Republican Party to make it very difficult for people to vote. And that's all of us. Last time around, they were primarily interested in having not having African-American voters in battleground states voting. This time, they've basically just decided that, we're all game, and they don't want to have the political will expressed the way it is actually being felt by most people. So I think, one of the things that's going on is that they're making, voting by mail difficult. They're making voting in person difficult. They're taking away drop boxes. And the best thing that I can say is that everyone needs to vote, ideally in person. You've got to be prepared to wait because that's happening too. Everybody needs to be prepared, and by which I mean to be safe, and then just go do it. And that's
our ballots arrived today in the mail, so we're looking forward to spending the afternoon voting.
Yeah. We live in Vermont, so we're not too concerned about what's going to happen to our ballots. But I think people in states like yours really do need to be concerned and need to have a voting plan and need to execute it. And all we can do is hope for the best.
It just occurred to me as you hold those up that you'll be able to spend more time at the ballot than at any other time you have gone into the little ballot area and just had to check off people you've never heard of. So maybe
it's true. I mean, one of the things that people have always been recommending, especially in the last couple of years, is to look at the ballot really before you go in, and even print out how you want to vote when you go into the ballot box, a ballot room rather, to vote. And that's a good idea. You can bring in pieces of paper, so why not? We're lucky. We live in a tiny little town, 523 people. We know the people in the polls. They know us, and it's a seamless and kind of lovely activity that we all do.
But I'm looking forward to I'm going to take hours voting just because I'm going to have a bottle of beer and just enjoy myself immensely. I can't remember when I've looked forward so much to casting a vote.
Sue, you forgot the bottle of beer. So it's a mask, a ballot, and a bottle of beer. I got it now.
Bill, why don't we move to you?
Yeah.
So look, The climate crisis is something we've known about for 3 decades, but it does feel like it's only in the last year or two that in this country that we've managed to get a kind of critical mass of people paying attention. That's the good news. I mean, the polling shows that upwards of 70% of Americans are now taking it seriously. Among Democrats, it's the #1 voting issue going into this election. The bad news is that because we waited so long, things are, to one degree or another, out of control. As we're talking today, California passed 4 million acres burned this year. 5 of the 10 largest forest fires in California history are currently burning. We're well into the Greek alphabet on hurricanes because we ran out of names in the normal flow of things. And so we're not going to get out of this without enormous damage. We've raised the temperature of the planet 1 degree already, Celsius. We're well on our way to 2 degrees, and we're headed on current business as usual paths for 3 or 4 degrees Celsius. If that happens, we can't have civilizations like the ones we're used to. And so our job is to arrest the rise in our temperature as quickly and decisively as we can so that our kids won't have a completely impossible situation to deal with, merely a difficult / miserable one.
So vote.
Vote.
This really does tie to climate change as well. We've watched our country, we've watched the world shaken by the COVID-19 pandemic, and at the same time, this summer we've witnessed civil unrest, the likes of which we actually haven't seen for a while, fed by both racial and social inequalities. Are there lessons that should be drawn from these 2 jarring forces that would carry us in a response to climate change? Does the pandemic, in point of fact, relate to climate change, and to what extent the inequalities that we see in the world are affected by climate change?
It's a very good question, and I think it relates in profound ways, and I'll just list a few. The first is that physical reality indeed is real. Doesn't matter if the president says that it's a hoax or it's going to go away by Easter or whatever, because he's not actually in charge. The biology is in charge, just in the same way that chemistry and physics are in charge of climate change. So if the microbe says wear a mask, wear a mask. Second thing, corollary to that, is that speed sometimes really matters. You know, the US and South Korea got their first COVID case on the same day in January, and the South Koreans went to work. We ignored it. We now know from Bob Woodward that we ignored it even though we knew precisely what was going on. And ignoring it turned out to be a poor strategy. That's why we have 200,000 dead people. And for climate change, read the last 30 years for February and March. We had strong warnings from scientists that we paid no attention to. That means that we now have to move very fast and condense the work of 4 decades into 1 decade. And it won't be easy, but it just emphasizes the need for speed. But the third thing I think that's most important that we learn is that social solidarity really matters. We came of age politically in the shadow of the Reagan years and the argument that markets were going to solve all problems and that government was the problem, not the solution. Reagan's favorite laugh line was always, the 9 scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Ha, ha, ha. It turns out the scariest words in the English language are either we've run out of ventilators or the hillside behind your house caught on fire. You can't solve those problems save with people working together, which is what we call governments. And that was really driven home this year because all of this coincided, as you point out, with this racial reckoning that's underway. The most important quote from 2020 is doubtless what George Floyd said as he was being murdered. I can't breathe. People can't breathe because they've got a racist cop kneeling on their neck. They can't breathe because police brutality stifles their community. They can't breathe because COVID has filled their lungs with fluid. And we know that COVID follows the same race and class lines as every other sad thing in this country. People can't breathe because there's a coal-fired power plant down the street. And you know down whose street, asthma rates for African Americans in this country are 3 times what they are for white people. People can't breathe because the wildfire smoke is so bad that the authorities have told them to go into their rooms and tape the windows shut. They can't breathe because it's just too damn hot. We saw the hottest temperature ever reliably recorded on planet Earth this summer, 130 degrees in California. That presaged this spate of forest fires. All of this is to say that we have to finally start working together in really deep, powerful ways if we're to have any hope of surmounting any of these problems. And as we start working together, we need to prioritize the most vulnerable people in our communities because they're most vulnerable to every damn thing that happens.
Sue, if both of you have engaged in civil disobedience. You have organized marches. You've participated in them. I know, Bill, you've been arrested. I don't know, Sue, if you have been. But
After that.
how much?
Don't worry, she was arrested, but much earlier than you.
Yeah,
I think it was
before
a
they were born.
demonstration at the Pentagon or something.
But do you feel that civil disobedience in our current age in particular, does it have a place? Does it work? Does it have an impact?
Well, I'm going to defer to Bill because he actually wrote a piece at one point that said that civil disobedience was one of the great inventions and tools of the 20th century. And so I'm going to defer to him, Mr. Civil Disobedience.
Well, I mean, nonviolent direct action is one tool in the activist toolbox. You don't want to overuse it. Like any tool, it can get dull, literally and figuratively. But there are moments, and Sue's right, I think. If you ask me to name the 2 great inventions of the 20th century that might get us through the 21st, one is the solar panel, which is our biggest hope for trying to cool down the planet. And the other is nonviolent movement building. The suffragists and Gandhi and Dr. King left us a profound legacy and the millions of people who worked with them. And we may need that legacy, we probably do, in order, among other things, to spread solar panels as fast as we can. Nonviolence is the way that the small and the many can stand up effectively to the mighty and the few. And I mean, that's the position we're in right now.
Sue, is that why he won the Gandhi Award?
I think so. I hope so. I would just add that one of the things that we saw in some of the demonstrations this summer was some very effective civil disobedience. There was a great video of a march. I think it was in DC, and basically everyone just sat down in the street, and they sang and they chanted and they didn't provoke anybody, and it was very moving. And I think it's the way that we overcome some of these narratives about Antifa and these narratives about how all the people who are protesting are violent. I think that's untrue. And if we make it clear that it's untrue, it exposes those as lies.
It's also worth noting that we had this amazing round of protest in the last 4 or 5 months, and that the people who engaged in it were incredibly responsible in that, as far as we can tell, they were wearing masks and most of the time and did not become the source of spread of coronavirus infection. It turns out that the really dangerous stuff is when you have a party at the White House.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, never go to a garden party at the White House. I think
Which suddenly looms as an example of how masks work, in addition to how they don't work.
Yeah, we didn't know that before that, so that's good that they pointed that out.
Science denial is a real thing, and people who don't quite believe scientists, medical doctors, climate scientists, whoever, I mean, it may be effective rhetorically, but it's not effective physically. The microbe doesn't care.
It may be early to make this observation, but wearing masks, I believe, is a good example of not civil disobedience, but civil obedience, and how people can work together. We drive into Chicago, into the suburbs, and I have kind of measured weekend after weekend, and it has grown to the point where it's almost 100% in many of the stores we see, the grocery stores. It is effective. Now, if we can...
Where we live, yes.
Where we live, but if we can simply change, wear a mask instead of the coronavirus, wear a mask to reduce the carbon that you use, or it doesn't have to be a mask, but follow these steps all together. But there's where the leadership comes in and has to declare the Manhattan Project.
Of course, part of the problem here is that, thank God with coronavirus, there's nobody whose business plan depends on us all dying of it. And in the case of climate change, some of the richest corporations in the world, their business plan really depends on continuing business pretty much as usual. And that's why it's been such a hard slog. But I think that we're beginning to reach the point, A, where people are realizing that irresponsibility for what it is, and B, where sun and wind now have gotten so cheap, and the companies that are building solar panels and wind turbines are beginning to approach in size the behemoths of big oil. In fact, last week, New Era Energy, Next Era Energy, the biggest solar and wind company, passed Exxon, until recently the richest company on earth in its market capitalization. So things should be beginning to shift a little bit.
In my home state of Kansas, I'm just becoming aware that a couple of innovative companies regard Western Kansas as the Saudi Arabia of wind power.
It's gone from bloody Kansas to windy Kansas. Absolutely.
You're right. But if they can, transmission lines used to hold them back, getting it from Western Kansas, the middle of nowhere, back to the East Coast to really get to the grid and power. But now that's not a problem. They are building that transmission line. They're up now to Missouri. Then they'll cross Illinois and Indiana and hit that grid. And we're almost there. I mean, it'll take years, but not a century. It'll take a number of years. Let me bring another subject up. Excuse me.
No, go ahead. No.
And that is another piece of good news, and I know you're into it because I've read and copied some of your information, and that is how the soil, the earth, can sequester carbon from the atmosphere. We've got 10 million acres in corn. The country has 100 million acres in corn. And the problem is that corn is not a deep-rooted plant. It's an annual plant most of the time, and it goes down about 5 feet. So it's not going to do a lot to sequester the corn. So research is going on, and there is some research coming out of the University of Illinois that says, look, we fertilize all the corn acreage with ammonium nitrate fertilizer, a poison, essentially, that kills microbes all the way down. And the microbes are what give us the power to absorb and sequester the carbon. We got to change that. And I know the Salk Institute is now working on developing GMOs in corn to make those plants go deeper into the soil. Native prairie plants, you have to have native prairie soil, can reach 14 feet down into the soil. Liatris, compass plant. We have a native prairie in back of our house. That reservoir We are just essentially discovering. I mean, 10 years is a short time, but we didn't hear about it prior to that. So to me, that's a very hopeful sign.
Now, what do you
of
hear
what
about
we
a shift in farming? I mean, it's a big finger that gets pointed at big ag, and not just that, but also the raising of cattle in particular, and pigs and hog farming and so on. What do you hear? What do you see? Do you see any way to change?
We have spent a lot of time going back and forth to the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas, where they have really pioneered this idea of different kinds of grasses that are quick growing, are deep rooted, as you point,
perennial,
and
as in
perennial,
wheat.
yeah. I think some of the things that you're hearing about are things that have sort of bubbled up from the work that they've done over the years. We also live in Vermont, where there is a lot of a revival, really, of small farms. They're not necessarily organic farms, but they are responsible farms, and trying to figure out how to make the food supply more secure while not degrading the environment. So that's, we have so many students from Middlebury College who've gone off either to work on farms or to start farms. And we've seen this like over maybe the last 10, 15 years. And prior to that, that was not considered to be a kind of respectable profession. You're supposed to go off and be a consultant or work for Goldman Sachs or something. So we do have a lot of hope in the young people that we know.
Or instead of going off to live in communes, as we all did, not me, but in the 60s, why, now to find a job on a farm is terrific. We're working with the Land Institute and students from Northwestern and Loyola and the Botanic Garden here in Chicago. We had a bad year because the weeds just kind of took us over.
It's hard work. There's no question.
Well,
to
we
make
learned,
this
I mean,
shift.
farming ain't easy.
No.
But we're all learning together.
But
And I
wanting to
think
make
that-
the shift is, incredibly important. There's no question that agriculture is a big contributor to a lot of the climate problems that we see.
Yeah.
We also know that the Joe Biden and prior to Biden, Elizabeth Warren have really started to listen to the young farmers and try to figure out how to have a more responsible agricultural policy. So I think if the political winds change, we're going to see that being pushed forward in a way that it hasn't in the last,
Carbon sequestration really is a kind of newly sexy topic in the world around climate change. I will say it's no silver bullet. It's not easy to do. We're taking on the oil companies. That's very hard because they're very powerful, but they're a manageable target set. There's 7 or 8 big ones. There are 1 billion farmers on the planet. And so it's difficult to get change as quickly as we need to. And it's one of the reasons why, for instance, the next iteration of the Farm Bill, when it goes through Congress, will be really important. Because we've got to start, you're right, we've got to start making some pretty basic changes in how we incentivize good stewardship.
And I believe one of those has to be a cash incentive to turn your land back into a natural prairie instead of continuing to make more money by plowing it up and put the corn in.
More prairie, absolutely.
we live in a meadow, so we're with you.
No, that's great.
Well, we're surrounded here, and certainly Ryerson is another great place.
There you are.
So you mentioned political winds, and I guess this is something that nags at me. How on earth did something like the environment, the place that we live, become so heavily polarized? Why is it that it shifted into a wedge issue? I mean, in the 60s, the Nixon administration passes the Clean Air Act. How do we get from there to here where it's a left. You're on the left if you believe in the environment, and you have to be opposed by the right in order to be on the right side of things.
Well, I mean, the history is interesting. You're right that through the 20th century, conservation was really a bipartisan project. Earth Day in 1970 was the biggest outpouring of environmental sentiment ever. We think that 20 million Americans, about 10% of the then population, was in the street. And so even though Richard Nixon was in no way an environmentalist, we know from his tapes that he thought they were all a bunch of dirty hippies, he nonetheless had no choice but to go along with the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and so on. And that was a continuation of a kind of bipartisan tradition. I'm afraid what happened in recent times is that the fossil fuel industry decided that it needed, facing the challenges posed by climate change, that it needed political cover. And in many ways, it purchased one of our political parties. I mean, the Koch brothers, our biggest individual oil and gas barons, became by far the biggest donors in American political history. And before all was said and done, we went from a situation where Republican President George H.W. Bush was pledging to fight the greenhouse effect with the White House effect, to the place where Republican President Donald Trump was insisting that it was a hoax manufactured by the Chinese. That's what happens when you have a kind of high-paid disinformation effort of the kind we now know, thanks to great investigative reporting, that the oil industry engaged in over many years. And so figuring out how to scale down that polarization may, I hope, be a task that we get to eventually. In the short run, we simply have to break the power of the fossil fuel industry to be able to do that. That's why people have engaged in projects like this vast divestment campaign. Now the biggest effort of its kind in history, we're at about $15 trillion in endowments and portfolios that have divested in part or in whole from fossil fuel. And, it's beginning to span a pretty wide ideological spectrum of people who are engaged in this, from the Rockefeller family, original oil fortune, who divested all their charities, to Georgetown University, to on and on, and all over the world. So there's at least some signs that people are beginning to come together. It's possible the American political system will be the last place that we manage to achieve that kind of unity.
The virus has made us drive less, use less carbon, and we see what can happen. We can actually make the numbers go down. And our corporations, especially those that serve the community, react to customers. Customers are always right. And if the people move in that direction, then I think the corporations will follow. I see it, Exxon, the leaders seem to be talking the talk, at least. Don't know whether I'm ready to trust them just yet. But it's behavioral change. And if everybody were led to get together and given and sell it well, so that you're doing it for the right reasons, I think that's our only hope.
So individual change turns out to be important, and we really have noticed that during the COVID lockdowns. I mean, look, you guys, as you know, the world changed more than it's changed at any point during our lifetimes. I mean, nobody I know was on an airplane. Sue and I, have barely left the house for months. And it did cut emissions. They fell 7 or 8%, something like that, which is good. It's nothing to sneeze at, but it is a reminder that there's strong limits to how much we can get through individual change. A lot of this damage is hardwired into the system, and we're going to have to go into that system and kind of rip out the coal and oil and gas and put in a lot of insulation and sun and wind. And that's probably above all a political task. So what, Sue and I have done our best, say, around our house. We're happy that we run our home on solar power and so on. But I think the thing we end up saying to people, and I think this goes for voting too, you correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, the most important thing an individual can do is be a little less of an individual and join together with others in the movements that are large enough to really make change. Yeah, you got to vote yourself, but Sue, what are some of the ways that people can band together to help make sure that everybody gets to vote?
No, I think the most important thing is for people to sign up to be a poll worker. Anyone can do it. You can be 16 years old in some places, 17-year-old. You don't have to even, be able to vote in order to help facilitate the voting process. To my mind, that's the most important thing that we can all do. You do it in your community, which is to say that you meet a lot of people in your community as you're doing this. And I think that also kind of instigates in your own mind this sense of community, and that voting is a group project and a team sport.
And there are some excellent projects out there from people like Stacey Abrams that to sort of help guard the right to vote. Yeah,
I mean, some of them are very, very specifically local, like Fair Fight, and some of them are more legal. But like Next Gen America organizes young people to vote. There are a couple of groups that are doing kind of texting and postcards and letter writing, where if you're in a state like ours, where the outcome is already predetermined, you spend some time writing to people in other states, into battleground states. So there are organizations that do that that are pretty easy to find on the internet.
I mean, all of this is annoying. As Americans, we should not have to be fighting to make sure that people have the right to vote. And it's any more really than we should have to be fighting to make sure that people listen to our governments, listen to clear scientific warnings about climate change. If we had a better functioning democracy, both these things would be happening more or less automatically. But obviously, that's not the world we live in at the moment. And it's why all the efforts of all of us together in communities, and the kind of work that goes on there in Illinois, that y'all are so building those kind of strong communities that can help us come together, is absolutely necessary, maybe in a way that it never has been necessary before. So we're really grateful to the work that y'all are doing there. And it's one of the reasons we were so gratified to get this particular honor.
One of the reasons we gave it to you, because of what you have done. There is another side to all this. When you stick your nose out there and you become a target, especially in the age of social media, what do you think about the ability of a small group to demonize the movement, people really for their political gains or gains of a movement?
Well, it's, it is small groups, but it's because they can take advantage of this extraordinary leverage that comes from these kind of Frankenstein monster kind of creations like Facebook. Sue is really expert on all of this and been writing about it over and over and over again. Talk a little bit about how that leverage just empowers bad actors.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really need a lot of people to make a very large impact. We know that now. And we also know that the way the algorithms are written, particularly for Facebook, they actually are put together to make those kinds of small but very incendiary kinds of claims much louder than they actually deserve to be. They get much more play than people playing nice. And so one of the things that I'm concerned about is the fact that we don't have a regulatory environment that makes that impossible to do. It, in fact, quite the opposite. It empowers companies like Facebook to have algorithms that allow very small groups of people to spread large amounts of disinformation, which we see, particularly with QAnon. a crazy, crazy story that they are foisting on people that unfortunately, gets a lot of play. And then a lot of people weirdly believe it. And this is where we are. And now we have, people running for Congress who are members of this organization, or at least support its points of view, which are repugnant. And it's something that I think we all need to be aware of and attempt to push our legislators to create a more sustainable regulatory environment to make sure that this stuff can at least get tamped down.
What big oil did to our actual atmosphere, companies like Facebook are doing to our political atmosphere. And that level of pollution in both cases is maybe, it's unsustainable. If we can't figure out a way to get a handle on both of them, then we're not going to have a planet to live on, and we're not going to have a functioning society to live in. So, those are the tasks, two of the biggest tasks for whoever comes next in our political system.
Well, as long as we're talking about the ways of disseminating information, both of you write prolifically for what we'd call the mainstream media, which some people call the fake news. What's your overview? Where do you think we are? Mainstream media under attack. Do you think it's waging well in New York Times, Washington Post? We get so much great information for them. Is there a reason to worry about where we are with good, solid journalism, or do you think it's in a good place and we just tend to overemphasize the Fox News and the notion of fake media?
The first thing to remember is that a lot of journalism is local. In order to figure out what's going on where you live and the things that matter to you, you have to have an ability to know that, and that comes from local journalism, and that's under attack. A lot of smaller papers and radio stations are being bought up by large conglomerates who speak primarily the language of finance and are only interested in making money. And so that becomes problematic. And once you kind of lose those sources, you end up relying on these kind of larger organizations that don't have a feeling for what's going on. So that's the first problem. And then we've got the internet where everyone's a reporter. And that can be good, and it can also be very disturbing. But I would say, last week, the New York Times had this remarkable series, or beginning of a series, about Trump's taxes. That is a piece of journalism that took months to uncover and to source and to write. And, we're all better off for that. And so one of the things I think that, if you care about the truth, if you care about democracy, then you have to care about journalism. And if you care about journalism, the best thing you can do is subscribe to lots of different newspapers and read lots of different newspapers, not only the ones that, are from the point of view that supports your point of view, but look at a lot of things. And that, I think, will make you a better citizen.
I've gotten to watch this for a long time because climate change is one of the great failings of the media for decades. It just treated it as a kind of he said, she said, both sides story, which it wasn't. Finally, in the last 5 years, much of the kind of top of the media, the Times, the Post, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, places like that have done a really fine job of covering this. The Guardian, Bloomberg, there's a long list of people, the economists, who are doing just tremendous reporting now about climate change, for which I'm very grateful. But it does tend to get drowned out by nonsense. I was on a call the other day, or doing a talk in Australia over Zoom, and we were talking about the fact that Australia exports more coal than any country on earth. And I said, yeah, it is. That's very dangerous, that export. But the most dangerous thing that Australia ever exported was Rupert Murdoch. And if he had just stayed at home, the world would be work far better than it does now, because the spread of nonsense is we spend an awful lot of time just somehow trying to stick a finger in that very leaky dike.
Remember also that this notion of fake news is a strategy on the part of the people who don't want you to know what's going on. And so they try to make it very difficult to trust what you're hearing, what you're seeing. Go back and read 1984. Go back and read Hannah Arendt about authoritarianism. I mean, this is a strategy, and it's working. But at the same time, we've got a lot of reporters out there, doing really, really good work. And it's really important to recognize that and to, give them a break when they make a mistake and support them.
Yeah.
Well, and we thank you for the writing that you do. New Yorker is one of my favorite, as well as The Atlantic. And there's just no question that we believe, for me, for so long, too, the idea, I think you were saying, Bill, that, you have somebody who says one thing, then you have to counterbalance it with somebody who says the other thing, as if that's the truth. And I think the really good journalism that's being done does some of that work of taking both of those and coming to a point where they communicate something. It's not, this person, then I have to rush over and get that. That somehow is fair and balanced. That's not fair and balanced. That's just presenting opposite sides, but not really shedding any real truth or light.
Yeah.
It's a difficult place to be. I think it's a really hard time right now to be an editor, to have the kinds of forces pushing on you. When you constantly have people saying, you're part of the liberal media, you're not letting both sides have their say. I think it makes it very challenging. It's also really difficult when you have a president who lies constantly, and you're trying to appear at least to be restrained and not calling out the truth as you hear it. So to that extent, I think if we have any problem with the fake news, it's that the news is sometimes more restrained than it needs to be.
Exactly.
Let me make just a point before we move on. We're half hour from Kenosha. Kenosha, who would believe that Kenosha would become the belly button for the United States? And suddenly everybody knows Kenosha, 17-year-old killed two, as a member of the militia who came in to protect the community from a Black Lives Matter protest. But he lives not far in a Chicago suburb, not far from us. It's an opportunity and almost demanding that reporters should open an office in Kenosha, because that's how important it is, and be doing a story on every detail. But our newspapers have been hammered down in their budgets. The Chicago Tribune has lost 400 reporters out of its newsroom.
And they were hammered down by Facebook and et al., which took the advertising revenue. And at the same time, if you look at Kenosha, Facebook essentially operated as a recruiting office for getting people to head over there with guns. So in every way, they degrade the level of discourse in our society, which is why anything that powerful and that venal should be regulated as quickly and strongly as anyone can figure out how.
Well, at this point in our conversation, we're so lucky to be able to broaden our virtual circle and to be able to hear from a few other notable environmental pioneers and activists. We asked them if they would record their reflections and to pose a question to both of you as well. First, we will hear from Brushwood's 2018 honorees, Robert Redford and Sibylla Shagars Redford.
Good evening. and greetings to our Brushwood Center family. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. In the midst of these uncertain times, Brushwood Center brings us hope for the future, and the focus of this symposium is both urgent and necessary. We must work together to create a new normal, one rooted in justice and sustainability. Bill and Sue, you have advocated for this future through every aspect of your lives. Thank you.
We congratulate you, Bill and Sue, on receiving Brushwood Center's 2020 Environmental Leadership Award for your powerful work in advocating for this beautiful and vulnerable planet. Through your writing and activism, you have launched a call to action to preserve our shared home. Now your two voices have multiplied into a greater voice, a movement of hundreds of thousands of people around the world, all advocating for change. Your message has touched our hearts and alerted our minds to the danger of inaction.
The challenges we face today, the pandemic, the climate crisis, racial divisions, require deep systemic change. And this change is vital to the protection of our home, planet Earth, and should be a call that transcends all divisions. To do this, we need creative solutions that reignite people's deep connection to our planet and to each other. Advocacy, art, a robust free press, experimental programs like Brushwoods, and grassroots movements like 350.org are powerful tools to accomplish the societal changes we so desperately need. And let us not forget the importance of voting.
Securing a just and sustainable future for people and nature means taking a stand for what we believe in. We can all find ways to contribute to the movement that you have helped ignite. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us as never before that all around the world we are in this together. While we each bring unique experiences and challenges, our future must unify us in action. We must not underestimate our collective power.
And thank you for your leadership, Bill and Sue, and for harnessing this collective power for positive change. We congratulate you. And we leave with a question. From your perspective, what is the greatest obstacle that stands in the way of our society acting on climate change?
I think that the biggest obstacle we face remains the enormous power of the fossil fuel industry over our political system. And that's why it's been so important that people rose up, especially across the Midwest, to do things like challenge pipelines, get in the way of them, that people rose up to say it's time for universities and churches and pension funds to divest from fossil fuel. And that work has been effective enough, I think, that power balance is starting to shift, and the ability of the fossil fuel industry to dominate our political life may be receding. If it recedes a little bit more, then there's actually a chance for reason to start prevailing. We don't lack for policies about how to deal with climate change. We have lacked for the political will to implement those. And that's why this battle to diminish the power of this industry has been so crucial.
Next, we'll hear from last year's honorees, Avery Levins and Judy Hill Levins.
Hearty congratulations, Bill and Sue, on receiving Brushwood Center's Environmental Leadership Award. Bill, you're our nation's best leader and writer for climate protection. Sue, your books are great, but your writings on keeping our right to vote may be even more vital right now. It's wonderful you're both in the New Yorker. Your writing and activism keep us all inspired, aware of the problems we face and the opportunities to fix them together in a spirit of applied hope. Thank you.
We appreciated the hospitality and the terrific reception when we received the 2019 award, and are sorry the pandemic is keeping you home during this celebration of the great leadership you both provide for the country and for the planet. We all miss being together at the beautiful Smith Nature Center venue, but at least we're all able to send the electrons and leave the heavy nuclei at home, where they belong. Amory and I have made some serious changes this year and are excited about being able to work with focus and commitment to our goals and vision to build a more just, prosperous, verdant, and peaceful future.
Here in the Banana Farm, I'm shortly going to start doing more university teaching and research to turn integrative design from rare to common and thus make the energy efficiency resource severalfold bigger and yet cheaper. This will accelerate the clean energy revolution that's already gaining speed. World coal use peaked in 2013, world car sales in 2017, world fossil fueled electricity generation in 2018. World CO2 emissions were flat in 3 of the past 5 years, but this year they're reversing their previous decade of growth. And this awful pandemic may well have made 2019 the global peak year for oil use and fossil fuel use in total, because by the time energy demand recovers to the extent it does, renewables will probably have become big enough to cover all future growth, containing fossil fuels to permanent decline. By June, the world's 16 biggest oil and gas companies put together were worth less than Apple. And now ExxonMobil has just exited the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Capital is fleeing fossil fuels, and that flight will reinforce their decline by shifting investment to efficiency and renewables, because they're cheaper, and by weakening fossil fuels firms' talent and their political clout. It's not a moment too soon, and it will help defund some of the corruption, Sue, that you inspire us to unite against so we can all restore public integrity.
My photographic work on my own and with Amory is expanding to bring nature's beauty into nonprofit workplaces in our community in Colorado and across the country. I'm excited about a local organization called Lead with Love, encouraging community and building action around issues like voting rights, vote by mail, and climate. We also became vegans this year and are losing weight, feeling better, and doing more good. Also, I'm loving being a wife, daughter of my healthy and independent 98-year-old mom, and as a mother of 2, grandma 2, friend, and homemaker, and hanging out in our passive solar banana farm with a 10-meter commute across the tropical jungle to our offices. I'm enjoying this chance to relax, rejuvenate, enjoy, and learn from people like you both.
So let me ask, what would each of you encourage the other to do more or less or differently to help achieve the goals you both share?
You go first.
Sue is my role model. She's doing, as far as I can tell, she's doing everything right. And, it's one of the secrets to our operation is that, we both get to support each other pretty well. We live out here in the middle of nowhere, pretty much by ourselves now that our daughter's gone. And so it's awfully good to have her there.
Oh, wow. I don't know if I can answer that question now. All right, Bill. It's impossible because I live with a person who has been telling us about climate change and what to do about it for more than 30 years. I feel that I have sort of absorbed his message in my pores, through my pores. And I don't know what more he could do. I really don't. I mean, it's very frustrating. It's incredibly frustrating to have been with the person who told us about this so many decades ago and to see things deteriorate the way they are. And I guess, I end up feeling a little sad about it for Bill's sake, not just for the rest of us, but for Bill in particular, because it's so frustrating.
Well, it's all here in the many books that you have written. So, the information for the questions and the answers, if people would just read it, why, we're ready to go march.
I wish it were just a matter of reading.
Well, we're very lucky here in Illinois, by the way, to have a true environmental warrior in Congress. He's Representative Sean Casten, and he also has a question for you.
Hello, Bill and Sue. Congressman Sean Casten here from Illinois 6th District. Recently appointed congressman, longtime clean energy nerd. Huge congratulations to you both on the 2020 Distinguished Service Award. Much deserved, Distinguished Environmental Leadership Award, I should say. Much deserved to both of you. And, deserved specifically because you have done what I think is consistently so hard. What I find, and I tell my colleagues all the time, is that there is that which is scientifically necessary, and there is that which is what we perceive to be politically possible. And so much of the conversation around climate never gets above that conversation of what's politically possible. And what you have both done so effectively is you have never taken your eye off the prize. You have always reminded us that this doesn't matter unless we do what's scientifically necessary. At the end of the day, our kids, our grandkids aren't going to judge us by whether or not we got a bipartisan vote on the floor. They're going to judge us by whether we got back to the 350 parts per million that you were saying was necessary about 50 parts ago. So thanks for all that you've done. I was asked to leave with a question, and I just give you this. It strikes me that in my 20 years of being involved in energy and environmental policy, whether as a scientist or entrepreneur, now as a member of Congress, we've transitioned from voices in Congress saying this problem is too complicated to act quickly, to some voices that are now saying this problem is too urgent to get bogged down in complexity. And either of those conclusions is suicidal, and would welcome your thoughts on how we make sure that we still maintain the complexity and the understanding of this problem and elevate the voices who understand the details, whilst also saying we have to move quickly. We don't have the opportunity to get this wrong, but we also don't have the opportunity to wait. So your thoughts on how we can recognize this as both urgent and complex would be welcome. Thank you again. Congratulations again. Stay safe.
So it obviously is a hugely complex problem because it implicates every part of our economy. Pretty much everything that happens in the course of a day contributes somehow to this spew of carbon into the atmosphere. So the answers to it are extraordinarily complicated. But since we have to deal with it very fast, time is not our friend. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said that unless we make fundamental transformations, which they define as cutting emissions in half by 2030, then our chances of meeting the Paris targets are essentially nil. Given that we have to move fast, we have no choice but to simplify. The basic task right before us right now is to shut down coal, oil, and gas as fast as ever we can. And really the only way to do that is the very rapid build out of renewable energy, sun and wind, and the batteries that store that power when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing. And the good news, and the thing that makes that completely possible, not easy, but completely possible, is simply how well the engineers have done their job. If we've been having this conversation 10 years ago, sun and wind were still expensive and intermittent and difficult to use sources of power. They're now the cheapest, cleanest, best ways to produce energy on this planet. We're going to go there. 75 years from now, the planet's going to run on sun and wind for all the reasons that everyone can think of. The problem is we have to do it fast. If we wait 75 years, we'll run the planet on sun and wind, but it'll be a broken planet. So we don't want to do that.
Next, we have questions from our future leaders, 3 inquisitive middle school students from the Cool Learning Experience, a Waukegan-based partner of Brushwood Center, providing environmental, social, and cultural learning experiences.
Hello, my name is Gopher Snake. I'm in 8th grade. I've been in Cool Learning Experience for 4 years. Here's my question. What and who inspired you to be an environmentalist?
So, first of all, I actually was one of those people who was in the streets when I was probably in middle school for the very first Earth Day. And on my backpack, I had an Earth Day sticker. It was actually decal. And did some work in my town. One of my very first pieces that I ever wrote for my local newspaper was about a battle over wetlands in our town. So that was, at the very, very beginning. But I would say that Bill McKibben is my big inspiration. I talk to him all the time and listen to him and have kind of absorbed a lot of his enthusiasm and messages and despair, but mostly just his energy in this space.
When Sue and I were first going out 35 years ago or so, she gave me as a present a book by the Kentucky, your neighbor in Kentucky, Wendell Berry, the farmer and novelist and essayist. And I was very young at the time, 25 or something. And that book had powerful effect on me and the way that I was thinking. So I do think it's really important that young people around the world, including middle schoolers, are now, at the very forefront of this movement. It's not just Greta Thunberg. There are Greta Thunbergs all over the planet. And it's really good that they're as literate about all these questions as they are. Doing a little bit of reading like that can only help.
My name is Pickle Frog. I am in 7th grade. I've been in some cool summer experience for 4 years. My question is, did you ever think of giving up telling people to stop climate change?
Well, of course, there's times when one gets sad because, when you're losing battles or things. But we win a fair number of those battles now. And the reason I don't despair is mostly because this movement keeps growing and growing very fast. And now young people are at the heart of it. But when I do get a little sad, it's a reminder of why places like Brushwood are so important. Sue, what do I do when I get a little despairing about things?
Bill puts on his hiking boots and takes a walk in the woods, usually with the dog. And just goes out and enjoys what's there for the taking. That's the restorative power.
Both of us find the natural world to be, absolutely central to and in our part of the world, it's the forest. We're in the northern forest. You guys are in the northern plains with those beautiful prairies. But it's all the same, that sense of being, small in something larger than yourself is restorative in lots of ways.
My name is Barnawal. I'm in the 8th grade and I'm from Cool Learning Experience. And my question to both Bill McKibben and Sue Halpern is, how can young people help the environment and in the face of climate change?
Young people are doing an amazing job. Young people are increasingly, at the center of the organizing. We're about a year away now. It was just about this time last year that we had the largest single climate demonstrations in history, and they were organized mostly by Fridays for the Future, the group that kind of sprung up once Greta Thunberg started her school strikes in Sweden. And it was young people all over the world, of all kinds, who really were at the forefront. Now, really young people like that can't vote, but as they get a little bit older, that's one of the key things. And Sue's been writing a lot in recent weeks about the efforts of young people to register other young people and make sure that they turn out.
Yeah. So, one of the things that's really interesting about that is that a lot of those young people who are doing the registrations of other young people came directly from the youth climate movement. And they saw that connection between having an agenda that they wanted to see put forward and making sure that they had people in power, in legislative power, to do something about it. And one of the things we saw that happened was that the Green New Deal was really a position paper that was generated by young people. So, you know, it's true that you can't vote until you're 18, but it is not true that that limits you in what you can do to put forward positions that make a difference.
And nag the hell out of your parents too, you know?
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Let's talk to our daughter about that.
I can't think of a better way to wrap up, and we allowed our youngest people, our future generation, to have the last questions, really. So Bill and I really want to thank you both for taking the time to be with us and to share your thoughts, your insights. You are ever inspiring to all of us.
Well, back at you. It's a real pleasure to get to be with another journalistic couple. And just to say thanks to you guys for your work over the years in your own careers, but also for your work with places like Brushwood that are just, you know, I mean, that's where the future lies. So we'll all do what we can to leave behind some kind of useful legacy.
And someday we hope to come and see it.
I was going to say, come visit.
Absolutely.
We would love to do that. We're very grateful to you all for what you do.
Absolutely.
All righty.
We'd love to have you.
Get better. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care, y'all.